ha-Kelim. In the unfolding of the Lurianic doctrine, after the compression and binding of ha-Kelim comes the realm of ha-Kelim, the world of points, the realm in which light emerges into distinct vessels and yet lacks the mutual inclusion that allows the flow of harmony. Ha-Kelim is the realm of the first differentiation of the 10 Shevirat, each standing as a separate point, each a singular stream of divine light, independent and uncompounded. It is the stage in creation in which the lights, having been bound in unity, now stand forth in isolation, each one a solitary flame. This is the realm of trial and fragility, for the vessels of ha-Kelim, unlike those of ha-Kelim, cannot sustain the fullness of the light given to them without breaking. Thus the teaching of ha-Kelim is bound to the teaching of Shevirat, the breaking of the vessels, the first shattering that brings the seed of Tikkun into being. The name ha-Kelim means points, and this signifies both the multiplicity and the isolation of this stage. Where ha-Kelim was bound, ha-Kelim is scattered. Where unity was preserved, now differentiation begins. Where silence and compression reigned, now the first breaking of silence comes. It is the realm in which the 10 Shevirat stand as 10 lights without interpenetration, 10 vessels each filled from above, without sharing or harmony, each a point of divine intention unmediated by the others. The result is both radiance and fragility. Radiance, because each vessel reflects a pure aspect of the divine. Fragility, because each vessel bears its light in isolation and cannot contain it without shattering. Thus ha-Kelim becomes the first stage of breaking, Shevirat ha-Kelim, the archetype of all fracture and repair in creation. To enter the practice of ha-Kelim is to enter a discipline of differentiation under tension, the cultivation of separate lights within oneself, held without dispersion, but without collapse into undifferentiated unity. Just as in ha-Kelim one bound all names together in a single vessel, in ha-Kelim one learns to hold the names as separate points, distinct but mutually harmonized. This is a discipline of both meditation and inner alchemy, to stand in the tension of difference without succumbing to chaos. The meditation of ha-Kelim begins with the visualization of the 10 points of light. One imagines 10 separate spheres, each filled with a different stream of divine light, arranged as a constellation in inner space. These are not abstract concepts, but living presences, each corresponding to a Shephira, Keter, Chokmah, Bina, Chizd, Shevirat, Tiferet, Netzach, Had, Yesod, Malchet. In ha-Kelim, each sphere is distinct, each light a single channel from the infinite without intermingling. The adept contemplates these 10 points as living centers of divine intention, holding them in silence while perceiving the tension between their separateness. A principal meditation technique in ha-Kelim is the practice of the 10-point Yichud ha-Kelim. Here, the practitioner calls each point by its divine name, contemplating its light as distinct but part of a whole. This is done not as a scattering of attention but as a deliberate ordering. One names each light in sequence, binding them in awareness as a constellation of points. This ordering is itself a discipline, for the mind tends to dissolve into scattering or to collapse into unity. The practice is to hold both tension and order, preserving difference without losing the sense of wholeness. This requires a deep attention and a certain inner steadiness, the steadiness of the vessel that can bear the multiplicity of points without fracturing. The names invoked in this meditation are not merely abstract, but correspond to deep currents of divine force. For Keter, the name Ehiyah Asher Ehiyah. For Chokmah, YHVH Elohim. For Bina, Elohim Tsabaoth, and so forth, each name a living channel of light. The adept recites these names in sequence, each name forming a point of light, and then holds the constellation in silence. This is an exercise in both concentration and endurance, the endurance of the soul to hold the tension of difference without collapse. In the discipline of ha-Kelim there is also the practice of breath-binding, Kavanat Neshama, which mirrors the cosmic reality of isolated vessels. The practitioner breathes in and assigns the breath to a single point of light, dwelling on it, holding it, before releasing it and taking the next breath for the next point. This is a breathing yichud, where breath and light are bound together in a sequence of disciplined isolation. Over time, this trains the soul in holding multiplicity, without scattering, teaching the interior rhythm of tension and release, and preparing the soul for the later stage of Tikkun, when differentiation will be harmonized into wholeness. The very essence of ha-Kelim is therefore the discipline of bearing difference without fracture, and this is mirrored in the inner work of the soul. In psychological terms, Nikudim is the discipline of developing distinct faculties of soul, intellect, will, emotion, desire, memory, each held in its fullness, but without letting them dissolve into chaos. This means cultivating not only concentration, but also the capacity for tension, the capacity to hold differences in balance, without collapsing into undifferentiated unity or breaking into destructive separation. In this way, Nikudim is an inner school of endurance and refinement, a preparation for the higher unity of Tikkun. The techniques of Nikudim are therefore both meditative and ethical. Meditation binds the points of light in awareness. Ethical discipline binds the points of the soul in life. In life, this discipline is expressed as restraint and order, restraint of impulse, order in action, distinction in speech. The adept practices speaking each word with intention, distinguishing his speech according to its purpose and its point, as in the meditation on the points. The adept practices acting with awareness of the distinct streams of his will, channeling each impulse into its proper place without allowing them to scatter or collapse. This is the living discipline of Nikudim, to inhabit difference without breaking, to live the tension of points without losing the unity that underlies them. The breaking of Nikudim is the inevitable result of the stage, for no vessel in Nikudim can contain its light in isolation. This breaking, Shevirat, is both tragedy and beginning, the shattering of the first vessels that will give birth to the worlds of repair. In the soul, it is the experience of fracture, when the self confronts its limits and must let go of control. But the breaking of Nikudim is not an end but a transition, the prelude to Tikkun, the realm of repair, where the scattered points will be gathered anew in harmony. Thus, the practice of Nikudim is not only the discipline of holding difference, but also the preparation for letting go, the preparation for the transformation of fracture into harmony. This transformation is the heart of the Nikudim discipline. To live Nikudim is to live in the tension of difference, to cultivate the capacity to hold points of light without collapsing and without breaking, and then to bring them toward repair. This is both a cosmic work and an inner work, a living imitation of the first breaking and the work of Tikkun that follows. In this way, Nikudim is not an isolated stage of creation, but a living path of inner transformation, a discipline of light and silence, tension and endurance, difference and repair. In the unfolding of Shar HaNekudim, once the consciousness of the soul has been trained in the unity of Akudim, the next passage is the entering into the realm of distinction and the tension of separation, which is the central work of Nikudim. This is the stage in creation where the 10 vessels emerge as isolated points, each bearing its own light in a singular channel, without the mutual interrelation that will come in later stages. It is a realm of radiance and fragility, for the vessels are not yet prepared to sustain the fullness of the light in their separation. The very name Nikudim, points, signifies both the beauty of distinction and the inherent instability of isolation. To live in Nikudim is to learn the discipline of differentiation under tension, a discipline which is not merely metaphysical but profoundly practical. It is the art of bearing multiplicity without collapse, of sustaining difference without fracturing the self. The practitioner of Nikudim first enters this discipline through the vision of the constellation of lights, a central meditative technique. In the inner silence, one visualizes 10 distinct points of light arranged as a living constellation, each one corresponding to a Shevirat, each one bearing its unique name and force. Keter as the crown of unity, Chakma as the force of creative insight, Bina as the vessel of understanding, Chizd as expansive love, Shevirat as constraining justice, Tiferet as harmony, Netzach as endurance, Hod as splendor, Yesod as foundation, and Malchut as manifestation. The adept sits in silence before these points, perceiving their distinction, without letting them dissolve into sameness, holding them in an inner constellation as one would hold stars in a map of the heavens. This vision is not static but living, a perception of tension, for each point exists in a state of separate force and yet is bound by the unseen harmony of the whole. This practice is the foundation of Nikudim, to hold difference in balance and to dwell in the discipline of tension without collapse. The second core technique of Nikudim is the meditation of the names of the points, Yichud HaNekudim, in which the practitioner calls each point into awareness by its divine name. This is not a mechanical repetition, but a living invocation, a calling forth of the light into a vessel of consciousness. Each name, Ehia Asher Ehia, YHVH Elohim, Elohim Tzabaoth, and others, becomes a living point of light. The practitioner holds each name in awareness, feeling the particular quality of its light and the tension between it and the other points. This sequence is practiced as an inner order, a disciplined recitation of the constellation of points, binding them in silence and in attention. The skill of this practice lies in sustaining the tension without collapsing into undifferentiated unity or scattering into chaos. It is the discipline of endurance, a training of the soul in holding multiplicity without breaking. A further practice is the binding of breath, Kavanat Neshama, which mirrors the cosmic structure of Nekudim. Breath becomes the carrier of light, and the adept binds each breath to a single point of the constellation. One breath, one point, sustained in attention, released only to take the next breath for the next point. This is a breathing yichud, a rhythm of concentration and release, a training in the holding of tension. Over time, breath becomes the instrument of inner harmony, teaching the soul how to carry distinct lights without collapse. The breath becomes a living measure of the discipline of Nekudim, a breathing of the constellation of points. This inner discipline has direct application in the life of the soul. Psychologically, Nekudim is the art of cultivating distinct faculties of soul, intellect, will, desire, feeling, memory, without letting them scatter or collapse. Each faculty becomes a point of light, held in attention. The practice is to bring awareness to each faculty in sequence, allowing it to shine in its own fullness, while holding the constellation of faculties as a whole. This is a discipline of self-order, a training of the soul in the art of bearing difference. It is a discipline that transforms life, turning ordinary moments into a practice of the tension of points of holding difference without fracture. Ethically, Nekudim teaches restraint and order. To speak is to choose a point. To act is to bind intention to a particular vessel of light. The discipline of speech in Nekudim is the restraint of tongue, the testing of each word before release, the choice of silence over scattering. The discipline of action is the channeling of will, the directing of desire, the sustaining of focus. The practice is not withdrawal but the disciplined inhabitation of difference. To live the tension of points without breaking, to act in the world as a bearer of distinct lights bound in harmony. The breaking of Nekudim, Shevirat ha-Kelim, is the inevitable consequence of this stage. For no vessel can contain the fullness of its point of light in isolation without fracture. This breaking is both tragedy and necessity, the shattering of the first vessels that gives birth to the world of repair, the beginning of Tikkun. In the life of the soul, the breaking of Nekudim is the experience of limitation, of failure, of the shattering of control. It is the inner moment when the self confronts its inability to hold all difference without collapse. But this breaking is not the end. It is the threshold of transformation. From fracture comes the possibility of repair, of a higher harmony. Thus, the discipline of Nekudim includes preparation for letting go, for receiving the breaking as a seed of renewal. The preparation for this letting go is itself a discipline. The adept learns to live in the tension of difference, to cultivate the capacity for endurance without rigid control, to hold the points of light without grasping. This requires a discipline of humility, the readiness to accept that the vessel will break, that the attempt to contain all difference in isolation is ultimately incomplete. It is a discipline of surrender within endurance, a living practice of both holding and letting go. This is the inner teaching of Nekudim, that the capacity to bear difference without breaking is itself the ground of repair. In ritual, Nekudim is enacted through the structure of Yichudim, breath binding, name meditation, and the careful ordering of intention. The practitioner prepares a sacred space of silence and concentration, visualizes the constellation of 10 points, names each point with its divine name, and binds breath and attention in sequence to each point. This is not a mere exercise but a living enactment of the cosmic stage of Nekudim, a representation of the first differentiation of the vessels, the holding of difference, and the preparation for the shattering and repair. It is a ritual of endurance, a living practice of tension and release, of distinction and harmony. To live Nekudim is to live the art of holding difference without fracture. It is a discipline of light and silence, of concentration and restraint, of breath and intention. It is a path that trains the faculties of the soul, teaches the art of speech and action, cultivates endurance and humility, and prepares the soul for the transformation of fracture into repair. This is the heart of Nekudim, to live in the tension of the points, to hold them as living lights, and to receive the breaking as the seed of a higher harmony. The deeper structure of Shar ha-Nekudim unfolds when one begins to contemplate not only the existence of the 10 points of light but their essential interrelation in the hidden economy of creation. In the Lurianic schema, Nikudim is the realm in which the lights are given to the vessels in their isolated state precisely in order that the process of Shevirat might be brought into manifestation. This is not an accident of creation, but a necessary step in the divine plan of Tikkun. The vessels of Nikudim are formed to stand apart, each bearing its own light in singularity, but this singularity is inherently unstable. This instability is the ground of Shevirat, the breaking, which is both the crisis and the possibility of creation. To meditate on Nikudim at this deeper level is to enter into the paradox of the stage itself, that the breaking of vessels is itself a hidden act of mercy, a preparation for the higher unity of repair. This deeper meditation begins with what in Lurianic practice is called the contemplation of the divine contraction. Tzimtzum is lived in Nikudim. In this contemplation, the adept perceives the isolation of the 10 points not as a failure, but as a divine act, the necessary self-restriction of the infinite light in order to allow multiplicity to appear. The vessels of Nikudim are the forms through which the self-restriction is enacted, and the breaking is the inevitable consequence of their inability to hold the fullness of the light. In meditation, this is approached through a subtle inward vision. The practitioner imagines the contraction as a veil of darkness drawn between the light and the vessels, producing a constellation of separate points, each a world unto itself. The meditation trains the adept to dwell within that veil, to live within the tension of light and separation, and to see the breaking not as destruction but as the beginning of repair. At the heart of this discipline is the technique of 10-point yichud with breath binding in extended form. This is not a simple repetition, but a living ritual of deep alignment of body, breath, mind, and soul with the constellation of Nikudim. The adept sits in complete stillness and begins by drawing inward the breath in a slow and measured rhythm, assigning to the inhalation the name of Keter, holding it in silence, and then releasing it. Then the next inhalation is drawn and assigned to Chakma, and so forth, through all 10 points. This is not merely a sequence of names, but a dynamic binding of the breath to the cosmic order of the points. Over time, this becomes an embodied meditation. The breath itself carries the constellation, and the practitioner learns to breathe Nikudim. In advanced practice, this is extended into a prolonged sitting in which each breath is bound to a name and a point until breath and light become a single living movement of the soul. Parallel to this breathing discipline is the visualization of the vessel points in dynamic movement. In advanced Nikudim practice, the constellation is not static, but is perceived as a living process of oscillation and tension. Each point shines, expands, and recedes, each breath feeding it and drawing it inward, while the constellation itself shifts subtly in inner space. This vision is not merely aesthetic, but is a teaching that the vessels of Nikudim live in the movement of giving and receiving, of expansion and contraction, and that the breaking comes precisely from the tension of this movement. The adept learns to dwell in that tension without grasping, to hold the movement of difference without collapse. This is a deep training of the soul's capacity for endurance and subtlety. The names invoked in Nikudim are themselves a living grammar of difference. In the advanced ritual of Shar Nikudim, the adept works with the divine names in their full numerical and phonetic potency. The 72 names of God, the 72 letter combinations that in Kabbalistic tradition correspond to the flow of divine energy into creation. These names are invoked in a particular order according to their alignment with the 10 points, and each name is not merely pronounced, but intoned with precise breath and mental concentration, so that the vibration of the name becomes living point of light within the inner constellation. This is the technique of name yichud, a living articulation of Nikudim in sound and breath, binding the inner vision to the fullness of divine speech. The discipline of Nikudim extends into ethical and mystical life in profound ways. The inner holding of difference without fracture requires the cultivation of inner restraint and the practice of integrity in action. In daily life, the adept practices the discipline of speech by aligning words with their inner point of light, testing each word before it passes the lips, asking whether it carries unity or scattering. This is the living translation of Nikudim. Speech is a point of light, held in silence before release. In action, the discipline is the channeling of will into ordered streams, so that desire is not scattered into endless impulsiveness, but flows into a constellation of directed intention. This is the ethics of Nikudim, to act with awareness of difference, to bind impulse to point, to live the discipline of holding without grasping. The breaking of Nikudim, Shevirat ha-Kelim, is not only a cosmic catastrophe, but an inner transformation. In the life of the soul, it appears as the experience of limitation and rupture, the breaking of control and the encounter with loss. Yet in the Lurianic teaching, this breaking is itself a hidden blessing, for it opens the possibility of the higher unity of Tikkun. To live Nikudim is therefore to live in preparation for that transformation, to cultivate the capacity to receive breaking as a passage into wholeness. This is the deeper discipline, the readiness to let go, the capacity to hold difference without collapse, and the humility to accept that all vessels are fragile. In the higher ritual of Shar HaNekudim, this preparation for breaking is enacted through the practice of the Yichud of broken points, Yichud HaNekudim ha-Shavrim, a contemplative rite in which the adept meditates on the breaking itself as a living point of light. In this meditation, the constellation of Nekudim dissolves into a field of fragments, each fragment a vessel point carrying a spark of divine light. The adept holds the vision of that shattering in silence, dwelling within the tension of fracture without fear. This is the preparation for Tikkun, to live the breaking as a moment of grace, to receive the fracture as the seed of repair. The highest attainment of Nekudim is not merely the mastery of technique but the transformation of the soul's way of being. It is the cultivation of a life in which difference is held as a living harmony, where the points of the soul shine in their distinctness without scattering, where breath and silence, name and vision, become a single discipline of endurance and surrender. This is the inner path of Nekudim, to live the tension of the points, to hold the constellation in the breath of attention, to receive the breaking as the doorway to repair. The Shar HaNekudim is not a stage to be surpassed, but a living school, a discipline that transforms both the inner life and the cosmic vision. To enter it is to enter a school of endurance and humility, to train in the art of holding difference without collapse, to learn the inner discipline of breath, name, and silence, and to prepare for the transformation that follows. In this way, Nekudim becomes a living path, a teaching of light and fracture, of silence and breath, of holding and letting go, a path that leads the soul through the first breaking into the mystery of repair. The ritual architecture of Shar HaNekudim is a living embodiment of the cosmic structure of the 10 vessels and their tension, a deliberate enactment of the stage before the breaking. In the Lurianic system, ritual is not a symbolic gesture, but an actual re-entry into the structure of creation, a means of aligning the soul with the divine drama of Nekudim. The adept enters the ritual as a living point of the constellation, carrying the breath and names into the inner chamber of silence. This requires a careful preparation, purification of body and mind, the ordering of intention, and the establishment of a sacred space in which the ritual can unfold. The preparation begins with a cleansing, physical, mental, and spiritual. This is enacted in a series of preparatory practices, washing of the hands, breathing meditations, and the recitation of preparatory psalms. These acts align the body with the rhythm of the points and prepare the soul to enter the discipline of Nekudim. The sacred space is arranged as a reflection of the inner constellation. 10 lights or symbols arranged in a circle or constellation, each corresponding to one of the vessels, each holding its own light. This arrangement is not decoration, but an embodied map of the stage itself, a microcosm of the cosmic structure the adept is about to enter. The core of the ritual is the Yichud of the 10 points, Yichud HaNekudim, performed in a precise sequence of breath, name, and vision. The adept begins with the inward breath, calling into being Keter, the crown of unity. This is held in silence until the point shines as a living presence. The sequence continues: Chakma, Bina, Chizd, Shevirat, Tiferet, Netzach, Had, Yesod, Malchut, each brought forth in its own breath, each named with full intention, each held in silent vision. This sequence is performed slowly, with attention to the inner quality of each point, until the constellation of Nekudim is fully present within the soul. This is the central enactment of Nekudim, the living holding of difference. From this foundation arise the advanced meditative expansions of Nekudim. Among these is the meditation of dynamic interpenetration, Hitlabshet HaNekudim, in which the adept perceives the 10 points not as fixed but as interpenetrating movements of light, each influencing and shaping the others. This meditation mirrors the subtle inner dynamics of creation. The isolated vessels are not entirely separate, for their lights pass through one another in hidden currents. The adept sits in silence before this vision, allowing it to unfold without control, dwelling in the tension of difference and the movement of mutual influence. This is a discipline of inner flexibility, to hold difference without rigidity, to live the tension without collapse. Another advanced technique is the Yichud of breath name integration, Yichud haneshma vahishim, in which breath and divine name are bound into a single living movement. Here the adept breathes the name of each vessel in such a way that the breath itself becomes the articulation of the name. This is not intellectual repetition, but a bodily invocation. The breath carries the name into the depths of the soul, and the name shapes the breath into a living vessel. Over time, this practice becomes a form of inner alchemy in which breath, name, and vessel converge. The adept learns to breathe the constellation of Nikudim, carrying the discipline of difference into the body itself. The esoteric application of Nikudim extends into the life of the soul as the cultivation of the discipline of inner order, Seder HaNefesh. This is the art of aligning the faculties of soul with the structure of the 10 vessels of ordering thought, emotion, desire, and will so that they shine as distinct points held within a living constellation. In practical terms, this means developing a way of living in which the soul's faculties are not scattered into confusion, but ordered in their difference. Thought is aligned with insight, emotion with restraint, desire with purpose, will with harmony. This is the inner discipline of Nikudim, the cultivation of a life in which difference is held as harmony, and harmony emerges from the living tension of difference. Ethically, Nikudim teaches the discipline of restraint and the readiness to receive fracture. The holding of difference without collapse requires an inner humility, the recognition that no vessel can hold the fullness of its light without breaking. The practice of Nikudim therefore includes the cultivation of the capacity to let go, to surrender control, while maintaining the discipline of attention. This is enacted in daily life by the testing of intention before action, by the careful ordering of speech, by the alignment of will with a higher order. To live Nikudim is to live as a bearer of tension, holding difference in silence and breath, prepared for the breaking that is the gateway to repair. The breaking of Nikudim, Shevirat ha-Kelim, is itself a living rite when approached in deep practice. In advanced ritual, this is enacted through the Yichud of the broken constellation, Yichud ha-Nikudim ha-Shavrim, in which the adept meditates upon the constellation of points dissolving into a field of sparks and fragments. This is not a vision of loss but a living perception of transformation. The breaking is the opening of the vessels into a higher possibility. In the rite, breath is drawn not into single points, but into the broken constellation, holding the fragments as living lights. This meditation prepares the soul to live the breaking as grace, to receive limitation as a seed of repair. The integration of Nikudim into the full path of Tikkun is the highest esoteric application. Nikudim is the discipline of difference before repair, and Tikkun is the work of bringing the broken fragments into a living unity. To integrate Nikudim is to carry its discipline into the stage of repair, to live the art of holding difference without fracture so that repair becomes possible. This is enacted in advanced Lurianic practice through the Yichud ha-Shalom, the full union of breath, name, vision, and fracture, in which the adept becomes a living nexus of the cosmic movement from contraction through breaking to repair. This is the living goal of Shar HaNekudim, to transform the discipline of holding difference into the capacity for repair, and to make the soul itself a vessel of Tikkun. Thus Shar HaNekudim unfolds as a living path of discipline, rupture, and renewal. Its rituals are not mere forms but enactments of the cosmic drama. Its techniques are not exercises but inner disciplines that train the soul to live within the tension of difference. To enter Nikudim is to enter a school of endurance, humility, and transformation. To dwell in its discipline is to prepare for the higher work of repair. And in the living enactment of Nikudim, breath, name, vision, and silence converge into the deepest teaching. That in the holding of difference lies the possibility of unity, and in the breaking lies the seed of repair. At the culmination of the study of Shar HaNekudim, the adept stands before the living horizon of creation, poised within the full discipline of difference, fracture, and repair. The final stage of this path is not a set of techniques alone, but an embodiment of the entire movement of the soul, the enactment of contraction, the holding of points, the reception of breaking, and the preparation for Tikkun. In the deepest Lurianic practice, Shar HaNekudim becomes not a stage to pass through but a perpetual inner school, a living discipline that transforms the soul's mode of being. The highest ritual form of Nikudim is the Yichud ha-Shalom, the complete union of points and breaths. This is a ritual that unites all previous disciplines into a single living movement. It begins in silence, with the adept entering a state of inward contraction, Kav hat Tzimtzum, in which the outer world falls away and the soul stands in the threshold of the 10 points. Breath is drawn slowly, each inhalation named and bound to a point, and each exhalation releasing the light into silence. This is not mechanical repetition, but a living rhythm, a dance of breath and name, an inner breathing of the constellation itself. In this state, the adept no longer merely imagines Nikudim, but becomes Nikudim. Each breath a point, each point a living spark of divine difference. The ritual space for this practice becomes an altar of the constellation itself. In advanced work, the adept arranges a sacred space with 10 lights, each representing a point of Nikudim. These lights are not mere symbols but living foci, charged with the names of God corresponding to their place in the constellation. Around them, the practitioner arranges the sacred words of the Zohar and the hymns of the Psalms, aligning speech and silence. The ritual begins with the recitation of preparatory psalms, invoking the mercy and judgment inherent in the vessels. Then the breath name sequence is enacted, followed by silent dwelling in the constellation until the breaking is intuited within the heart. The deepest aspect of this rite is the contemplation of the breaking as living light, Hipponomate Shevirat. Here the adept does not fear the fracture, but welcomes it as the necessary opening to repair. In this contemplation, the constellation dissolves, and the fragments themselves are perceived as living points of light carrying sparks of divine unity. This is the deepest teaching of Nikudim, that fracture is not absence but transformation, that the breaking is itself a hidden form of mercy. The adept learns to dwell in this dissolution without grasping, allowing the breaking to become the seed of Tikkun. From this practice flows the living discipline of ethical Nikudim, Derech HaNikudim. In life outside ritual, the adept carries this discipline into every action, cultivating restraint, presence, and the readiness to receive fracture as grace. Speech is tested before utterance, desire is measured before pursuit, and action is aligned with a higher order. This is the living extension of the ritual, the daily enactment of the holding of difference without collapse, the cultivation of readiness for repair. Ethics in Nikudim is not abstract moralizing, but an embodied discipline, a constant inner movement of ordering the self in accordance with the cosmic pattern of the points. The advanced meditator of Nikudim develops a full catalog of techniques that together form a living art of difference and repair. 1. Breath name Yichud, the integration of breath and divine name in slow sequence, binding the soul to the constellation. 2. Contemplation of the veil, dwelling within the inner contraction and the tension of separation. 3. Meditation of dynamic interpenetration, perceiving the points as living movements of influence rather than fixed forms. 4. Yichud of the broken constellation, holding the vision of shattering as a living reality and the doorway to Tikkun. 5. The ethical discipline of speech, aligning words with their inner point of light before utterance. 6. The discipline of will, ordering desire into directed streams that reflect the harmony of the constellation. 7. The contemplation of repair, dwelling in the breaking as the hidden seed of wholeness. Each of these techniques is not a separate exercise, but a living movement in the whole discipline of Nikudim. They are bound together in a single arc of inner work that mirrors the cosmic drama of creation itself. To practice them is to enter into the living mystery of contraction, holding, breaking, and repair. The integration of Shar HaNikudim into the full Lurianic path is the movement toward Tikkun Olam in the deepest sense, the repair of all creation. Nikudim is the discipline of difference, and Tikkun is the work of bringing difference into harmony without erasing it. This is the living teaching of Luria, that the vessels were broken so that they might be repaired, and that repair is the living task of the soul. To integrate Nikudim is to carry this discipline into the whole of life, to act with awareness of difference, to live in the tension of fracture without fear, and to hold every point as a living spark of unity. In the highest synthesis, Shar HaNikudim becomes a living grammar of the soul's movement. Breath and name, vision and silence, difference and fracture, restraint and repair, all are woven into a single discipline. The adept becomes a living point of Nikudim, breathing the constellation, holding the tension, and receiving the breaking as a blessing. In this way, the path of Nikudim is not a stage to be surpassed, but a perpetual school, a living discipline of endurance, humility, and transformation. Thus concludes the inner architecture of Shar HaNikudim. It is a school of breath and name, a discipline of difference, a living path of fracture and repair. To enter it is to enter the inner heart of the Lurianic drama, to stand within the tension of the points, to breathe the constellation, to receive the breaking, and to prepare for the living work of Tikkun. In this living enactment, Shar ha-Kelim becomes not merely a stage in the cosmic process, but a way of life, the way of holding difference as a living harmony and receiving fracture as the seed of repair. This is the teaching of Shar ha-Kelim, preserved in the deepest currents of Lurianic Kabbalah, a teaching of breath, of name, of silence, of fracture, and of repair. It is a teaching for the soul that dares to stand within the mystery of creation, to hold the tension of difference, and to live the path of repair.